Day 81 of the 100 Days of Narration Challenge. Yes, that's right, day 81 and day 5. Day 5 of the Harry Potter week, or J.K. Rowling week. Hey everybody. So today's book is going to be obviously the 5th book of the Harry Potter series, and it's Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, otherwise known as the biggest book of the series. This is really, really heavy. Oh my god, why did I, at least it isn't hardback. Oh god, that would have been even worse. The books after this seem to be smaller, but I'm assuming it's because they used a smaller font on the pages or some other printing method to make it less huge. How many pages in total has this got? Almost 800. Almost 800 pages. It's almost the Robert Jordan book. You know, only it doesn't have like 100 pages of appendices like the Robert Jordan book does. Anyway, so, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It's a book that everyone should have read. If you haven't, you should. Let me just read the back here to say, yeah, the blurbs are getting longer and longer with each book as well. That's that's incredibly amusing, actually, when I think about it. Anyway, okay, so reading the blurb, Harry Potter is about... Sorry. Oh, God, I've screwed up already and I haven't even started. Harry Potter is due to start his 5th year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. His best friends Ron and Hermione have been very secretive all summer, and he is desperate to get back to school and find out what has been going on. However, what Harry discovers is far more devastating than he could ever have expected. Suspense, secrets, and thrilling action from the pen of J.K. Rowling ensure an electrifying adventure that is impossible to put down. So yeah, that's a little blurb for, well, getting bigger. I'm sure the next time will be like half a page, and next time will be a full page of the entire thing. Okay, so let's flip through random pages. So many freaking pages. Okay, we'll stop there, and we'll start at an actual chapter and read from there. Okay. Chapter 21, The Eye of the Snake. Snake. Right. Hermione plowed her way back to Hagrid's cabin through 2 feet of snow on Sunday morning. Harry and Ron wanted to go with her, but their mountain of homework had reached an alarming height again, so they remained grudgingly in the common room, trying to ignore the gleeful shouts drifting up from the grounds outside, where the students were enjoying themselves skating on the frozen lake, tobogganing, and, worst of all, bewitching snowballs to zoom up to the Gryffindor Tower and rap hard on the windows. "Oi!" bellowed Ron, finally losing his patience and sticking his head out the window. "I am a prefect, and if one more snowball hits this window, ouch!" He withdrew his head sharply, his face covered in snow. "It's Fred and George," he said bitterly, slamming the window behind him. "Gits." Hermione returned from Hagrid's just before lunch, shivering slightly, her robes damp to the knees. "So?" said Ron, looking up... Oh, sorry, wrong voice. "So?" said Ron, looking up when she entered. "Got all his lessons planned out for him?" Sorry, that's not the correct word. Got all his lessons planned for him? Planned for him? "Well, I tried," she said dully, sinking into a chair beside Harry. "Well, I tried," she said dully, sinking into a chair beside Harry. She pulled out her wand and gave it a complicated little wave so that hot air streamed out of the tip. And then she then pointed this at her robes, which began to steam as they dried out. "He wasn't even there when I arrived. I was knocking for at least half an hour, and then he came stumping out of the forest." Harry groaned. The Forbidden Forest was teeming with the kind of creatures most likely to get Hagrid the sack. "What's he keeping in there? What did he say?" he asked. "No," said Hermione miserably. "He says he wants them to be a surprise. I tried to explain about Umbridge, but he just doesn't get it. He kept saying nobody in their right mind would rather study gnarls than chimeras. Oh, I don't think he's got a chimera," she added, at the appalled look on Harry and Ron's faces. "But that's not for lack of trying." But that's not from lack of trying. No, for lack of trying. But that's not for lack of trying. From what he has said about how hard it is to get eggs. Let's try that entire sentence again, shall we? Or paragraph. "No," said Hermione miserably. "No," said Hermione miserably. He says he wants them to be a surprise. I tried to explain about Umbridge, but he just doesn't get it. He kept saying nobody in their right mind would rather study gnarls than chimeras. Yeah, it is. It's chimeras, not chimeras. Or is it chimeras? Chimera. God, now I'm confused. I said it right the first time, right? I can't remember how to say it. Chimeras. Oh, I don't think he's got a chimera. Chimera. Yeah, chimera. She added, at the appalled look on Harry and Ron's faces. But that's not for lack of trying. From what he said, how hard it is to get eggs. I don't know how many times I told him he'd never. I don't know how many times I told him he'd be better off following Grubby Plank's plan. I honestly don't. God, I'm losing my place on this page. Okay, let's try this again. Chimeras. He kept saying nobody in their right mind would rather study gnarls than chimeras. Oh, I don't think he's got a chimera, she added at the appalled look on Harry and Ron's faces. But that's not for lack of trying from what he said about how hard it is to get eggs. I don't know how many times I told him he'd be better off following Grubby Plank's plan. I don't know how many times I told him he'd be better off following Grubbly Plank's plan. I honestly don't think he listened to half of what I said. He's in a bit of a funny mood, you know. He still won't say how he got all those injuries. Hagrid's reappearance at the staff table at breakfast the next day. There's no the next day. God damn it, that's why I'm getting confused. Hagrid's reappearance at the staff table at breakfast next day was not greeted by enthusiasm from all students. Some, like Fred, George, and Lee, roared with delight and sprinted up the aisle between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff tables. Oh, God. Some, like Fred, George, and Lee, roared with delight and sprinted up the aisle between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff tables to wring Hagrid's enormous hand. Others, like Bravati and Lavender, exchanged gloomy looks and shook their heads. Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's. Oh dear Lord, that name! Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it all was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew that they had good reason. Grubbly Plank's idea of an interesting class was not one where there was a risk of that. Okay, I give up. I'm going to do this a sarcastic way. Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew that they had good reason. Grubbly Plank's idea of an interesting class was not one where there was a risk that somebody might have their head ripped off. Okay. Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew that they had a good reason. And there's just good reason, there's no A in there. Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it all, there's no... Oh. God damn it! Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew that they had good reason. Grubbly Plank's idea of an interesting class was not one where there was a risk that somebody might have their head ripped off. Okay, again, just more naturally, Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lessons, and the worst of it was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew that they had good reason. Grubbly Plank's idea of an interesting class was not one where there was a risk that somebody might have their head ripped off. Finally. Christ. It was with a certain amount of apprehension that Harry, Ron, and Hermione headed down to Hagrid's on Tuesday, heavily muffled against the cold. Harry was worried not only about what Hagrid might have decided to teach them, but also about the rest of the class, particularly Malfoy and his cronies, would behave. Harry was worried not only about what Hagrid might have decided to teach them, but also about how the rest of the class, particularly Malfoy and his cronies, would behave if Umbridge was watching them. Okay, right. However, the High Inquisitor was nowhere to be seen as they struggled through the snow towards Hagrid, who stood waiting for them on the edge of the forest. He did not present a reassuring sight. The bruises that had been purple on Saturday night were now tinged with green and yellow, and some of his cuts still seemed to be bleeding. Harry could not understand this. Had Hagrid perhaps been attacked by some creature whose venom prevented the wounds it inflicted? What is going on? Why is she doing these long sentences? This sentence is a paragraph long. It should be its own paragraph. Oh dear Lord. Okay. He did not present a reassuring sight. The bruises that had been purple on Saturday night were now tinged with green and yellow, and some of the cuts still seemed to be bleeding. Harry could not understand this. Had Hagrid perhaps been attacked by some creature whose venom prevented the wounds it inflicted from healing? As though to complete the ominous picture, Hagrid was carrying what looked like a half-dead cow. Hagrid was carrying what looked like half a dead cow over his shoulder. I guess I have to shout now in order to be able to read these sentences. This is a terrible, terrible day. We're working in here today, Hagrid called happily to the approaching students, jerking his head back at the dark trees behind him. Bit more sheltered. Anyway, they prefer the dark. What prefers the dark? Harry heard Malfoy say sharply to Crabbe and Goyle, a trace of panic in his voice. What did he say prefers the dark? Did you hear? Harry remembered the only other occasion on which Malfoy had entered the forest before now. He had not been very brave then either. He smiled to himself. After the Quidditch match, anything that caused Malfoy discomfort was all right with him. Ready? Said Hagrid cheerfully, looking around at the class. Right. Well, I've been saving a trip into the forest for your 5th year. Thought we'd go and see these creatures in their natural habitat. Now, what we're studying today is pretty rare. I reckon I'm probably the only person in Britain who's managed to train them. And you're sure they're trained, are you? Said Malfoy, the panic in his voice even more pronounced. Only it wouldn't be the first time you'd brought wild stuff to class, would it? The Slytherins murmured agreement, and a few Gryffindors looked as though they thought Malfoy had a fair point, too. Course they're trained, said Hagrid, scowling and hoisting the dead cow a little higher on his shoulder. "So what happened to your face, then?" demanded Malfoy.
"Mind your own business,"
said Hagrid angrily.
"Now, if you've finished asking stupid questions, follow me."
He turned and strode straight into the forest. Nobody seemed much disposed to follow. Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione, who sighed but nodded, and the three of them set off after Hagrid, leading the rest of the class. They walked for about 10 minutes, until they reached a place where the trees stood so closely together that it was as dark as twilight, and there was no snow at all on the ground. With a grunt, Hagrid deposited oh dear Lord. With a grunt, Hagrid deposited his half a cow on the ground, stepped back, and turned to face his class, most of whom were creeping from tree to tree towards him, peering around nervously as though expecting to be set upon at any moment.
Gather round, Hagrid encouraged. "Now they'll be attracted by the smell of the meat, but I'm gonna give them a call anyway, 'cause they'll like to know it's me."
He turned, shook his shaggy beard to get the hair out of his face, and gave an odd, shrieking cry that echoed through the dark trees like the call of some monstrous bird. Let's try that one again. He turned, shook his shaggy beard to get the hair out of his face, and gave an odd, shrieking cry that echoed through the dark trees like the call of some monstrous bird. Nobody laughed. Most of them looked too scared to make a sound. Hagrid gave the shrieking cry again. A minute passed in which the class continued to peer nervously over their shoulders and around trees for a glimpse of whatever it was that was coming. And then, as Hagrid shook his hair back for a third time and expanded his enormous nest, as Hagrid shook his hair back for a third time and expanded his As Hagrid shook his hair back for a third time and expanded his enormous chest. A minute passed in which the class continued to peer nervously over their shoulders and around trees for a first glimpse of whatever it was that was coming. And that was a previous sentence, and I didn't need to read that out loud again because I got it right the first time. And I got it wrong the second time. That's great. And then, as Hagrid shook his hair back for a third time and expanded his enormous chest, Harry nudged Ron and pointed into the dark space between two gnarled yew trees. A pair of blank, white, shining eyes were growing larger. I was expecting larger and larger, but no. A pair of blank, white, shining eyes were growing larger through the gloom. Oh dear Lord, I hate that. Through the. A pair of white, shining eyes were growing larger through the gloom, and a moment later, the dragonish face, neck, and then skeletal body of a great black winged horse emerged from the darkness. It looked around at the class for a few seconds, swishing its long black tail, then bowed its head and began to tear flesh from the dead cow with its pointed fangs. A great wave of relief broke over Harry. Here at last was proof that he had not imagined these creatures, that they were real. Hagrid knew about them too. He looked eagerly at Ron, but Ron was still staring into the trees. He looked eagerly at Ron, but Ron was still staring around into the trees, and after a few seconds he whispered, Why doesn't Hagrid call again? Most of the rest of the class were wearing expressions as confused and nervously expectant as Ron's, and were still gazing everywhere but at the horse standing feet from them. There were only 2 other people who seemed to be able to see them. A stringy Slytherin boy, standing just behind Goyle, was watching the horse eating with an expression of great distaste on his face, and Neville, whose eyes were following the swishing progress of the long black tail.
Oh, and here comes another one,
said Hagrid proudly, as a second black horse appeared out of the dark trees. I hate the word "the." I just hate it. I hate it. And every single time I say it, it just doesn't sound right.
Oh, and here comes another one,
said Hagrid proudly, as a second black horse appeared out of the dark trees, folded its leathery wings closer to its body, and dropped its head down. Said Hagrid proudly, as a second black horse appeared out of the dark trees, folded its leathery wings closer to its body, and dipped its head to gorge on the meat.
Now, put your hands up. Who can see him?
Immensely pleased to feel that he was at last going to understand the mystery of these horses, Harry raised his hand. Hagrid nodded at him. Oh, okay, wow, that was really terrible. That was quite horrible. It started off well, and then sort of disintegrated halfway through. Not great. Not a great reading, that one was. Sorry about that. And I get the feeling that the last 2 books will not be any better. I just don't know. These books are... these books are great, but I'm not getting the rhythm. I'm really not getting the rhythm. There's rhythm in the writing, but it's not coming for me. I feel like every time I think I'm getting it, it's like, oh no, completely changing gears. We're going from classical music to hip hop. That's a horrible analogy, but it's like that. It's just the beat, the tempo, the words suddenly changing gears. It's just annoying. But a good voice actor should be able to find that music and bring it out of the words and make it all make sense no matter what the words are. Because that's what voiceover artists do. We make sense of the impossible and we make magic from what is already magical. Make more magic from what is already magical. Alright. So, yeah. That was day 81 of the 100 Days of Narration Challenge. That was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, because we're in the middle of Harry Potter week. So I hope you enjoyed that. Come back tomorrow where I'll be reading the 6th book of the series, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Yes! That should be fun. Or terrible. One of the two. Anyway. Alright, see y'all tomorrow.
Hey, you seem like a cool, wonderful, and/or awesome individual with impeccable taste in voice actors. So why not follow me on Facebook or Twitter? You can keep up with the latest projects I'm in, or that my friends are in, or that you could be in, because I occasionally post links to open editions to various projects that require voice acting out there, or that nobody's in, but they're interesting projects nonetheless that you may also find interesting. Also, lots of random thoughts about whatever's on my mind at that particular moment. Usually it's about food or video games, or foodie video games. Anyway, you can follow me on Facebook at OmadonVA or Twitter at Omadon. Hope to see you there.